Hello, this is a Brave Knight Mercenary Spotlight on Ledakrad. Ledakrad is a legendary defender and is part of the new legends called Personas. Have to put emphasis on the Z. Ledakrad was born as a result of half of Adele's soul that got absorbed by a homunculus. Adele is the main protagonist of the campaign part 2 for your information, which is why Ledakrad looks a lot like Adele. However, he always has this huge emptiness inside of him, and he became determined to get rid of the emptiness. Alright, I'm not reading or paraphrasing this shit. This reads like a 12-year-old's fanfiction of Tokyo Ghoul. Ledakrad has an identity crisis, and that's it. Moving on. Ledakrad's companion is Nia, not to be confused with the best cat girl, Nia. And as for Nia, I really like her. She's perfect in every way except she sweats a lot. Nice to know. I'll briefly go over Ledakrad's skills, gameplay style, and provide some of my opinions on him. I won't be going over the details of his skills, but just the general parts of it. I'll link to Brave Knight's encyclopedia in the video description where you can easily read on the stats and skill values. Ledakrad's first skill is Homunculus Duplication. This is Ledakrad's signature copy skill and is the main reason as to why he is such a unique character. When the battle begins, Ledakrad will copy all of his allies' defenders' applicable skills that take place before battle and apply it to himself. There are some rules that are involved to determine whether or not Ledakrad can copy a skill. The most important rule is that the defender's skill must have the activation condition that it occurs before battle. A skill that occurs before or after attack cannot be copied. Skills that occur when battle begins also cannot be copied. The wording is very important here. Even if a skill occurs before battle, it may not be able to be copied. Make sure to check if a skill has an exception where it explicitly states that it can be duplicated. Let me provide two examples. Lucia's resurrection ability occurs before battle, but it has no exception mentioned where that it can be duplicated. Similarly, Rimuru has 3 of his abilities that occur before battle, but it has no mention that any of them can be duplicated as well. Upon starting the battle with Ledakrad, Lucius, and Rimuru on the field, my Ledakrad ended up with no copied abilities. So make sure you read the ability that you intend to copy and see if it's eligible. I'll go more into details on this in the synergy section of the video. Lastly, there are some skills that occur before battle that can be duplicated despite not having an exception where it says it can. The only one I found so far is Cecilia's permanent AoE absorption skill. Despite the skill not saying that it can be duplicated, Ledakrad copied it just fine anyways, so this might be an oversight. As you could probably guess, Ledakrad can create interesting combinations of his ally skills and become some kind of super tank. There's a lot of possibilities with the skill alone. The skill also comes with a permanent stat enhancement boost when battle begins and will increase Ledakrad's max HP by a percentage amount. Ledakrad's second skill is Chains of Emptiness. Ledakrad bestows himself a temporary special buff that allows him to survive a lethal hit and set his health to 1 instead. Upon reaching lethal damage, he also gains a permanent HP boost. At plus 12 and above, Ledakrad gains another Chain of Emptiness in this skill, essentially giving him 2 opportunities to survive death and another HP boost as a result. Ledakrad's third skill is the Unstable. This skill activates when Ledakrad's Chain of Emptiness is activated or its duration expires. In the case that Ledakrad is plus 12 or above, the Unstable will activate when Ledakrad's second Chain of Emptiness is broken through or expires. The Unstable provides Ledakrad with Congestion Bash, which is a defense ignoring additional damage that occurs after normal attack that scales with Ledakrad's bonus HP. Ledakrad remains in an unstable state for a set amount of turns, and once his timer runs out, Defect will activate, which will inflict Extinct onto Ledakrad. Extinct is pretty much instant death in this game, so the way to view this skill is that once Ledakrad survives 1 lethal hit, he will do more damage for a set amount of turns and then die afterwards. Ledakrad's awakening skill is Pulverization. Ledakrad deals defense ignoring additional damage based on his max HP. At plus 11 and above, he also gains Taunt for 6 turns. Ledakrad's gameplay is best described as a variable defender that can be customized based on your team layout. Ledakrad's unique ability to copy his ally's defender skill can create some very interesting combinations that provide Ledakrad a lot of utility. I'll go over this more in detail in the synergy section of this video. Talking about his baseline skill set, Ledakrad is a typical defender with decent health values. His health is further increased by his first skill and can go around at least 32,000 health or higher if he's plus 10 and above. Ledakrad also comes with his own death-defying mechanic in the form of Chain of Emptiness. When Ledakrad takes lethal damage, he'll be set on a timer where he'll gain more max HP and deal even more damage. His damage scales with his bonus and max health. His additional damage also ignores defense, which is a nice bonus, and is also pretty nice that Ledakrad targets the back tile. While Ledakrad does have taunt on his awakening skill, it's only a 6-turn taunt, which doesn't serve well overall to make him function as a taunt tank alone. When it comes to runes, Ledakrad prefers 1 flat vitality rune and 1 percentage vitality rune. Ledakrad's base HP is low enough where the flat percentage split is optimal even at max rank boost. A lot of his health comes from bonus health that scales with his base, so optimizing his base health is key here. I'll go over what Ledakrad counters. Ledakrad's defense ignoring damage makes him pretty ideal against many units that bank on defense as their sole defensive trait. Dalvi, Angelica, and Eden are a few. There are some 100% defense like Levia and Orvina that has a lot more HP along with incoming damage reduction and can actually survive Ledakrad pretty reliably. He could potentially offset this if he has crit support or if he has his unstable mode active. Ledakrad's high health also makes him fairly solid at dealing with units that deal set fixed damage. Seto and Dalvi may struggle to kill him as a result. Also, just to make the general point here, Ledakrad can counter many different kinds of units depending on what skills he ends up copying. For the sake of making this somewhat simple, I did not include that here. You can make out the logical conclusion on your own however. For example, if Ledakrad copies Glacia skills, then he'll carry identical counters to her and subsequently may share her weaknesses as well. I'll go over some Ledakrad counters now. Without going too much into detail about what skill combinations he may have, the best answer hands down is direct damage, especially Valze's. Valze has many sources of direct damage and can deal a lot of it. With enough graves and buffs, Valze can one-shot Ledakrad through both of his Chain of Emptiness buffs. Even if he can't be one-shot, triggering his first Chain of Emptiness will set him on the guaranteed path of death due to his self-inflicted extinction. Alec and Levia are still great choices in that regard. Ledakrad has a very small brief moment where he has taunt, but that is enough for Ventana to outright beat him. Ledakrad needs to be equipped with a guard skill from one of his allied defenders to avoid any damage from her. From a strategic standpoint, Ledakrad needs to be approached in a few ways. In Arena, you need to run an offense that is strong and varied enough to beat different variations of Ledakrad. In Guild War and Underground Arena, you have to observe what skills he will copy and figure out if you have the golden gun to make him die once at least. So, some synergies with Ledakrad. Alright, this is going to be the bread and butter of the video. I'm going to approach this by going through the current lineup of 5-star defenders with companions and assigning the relationship of them a letter of either S, A, B, C, D, or F tier. That's a lot of letters, and some may not get used actually. I did not include the 5-star defenders who do not have companions because they are liable to change in the future, and I didn't include 4 stars because they generally compete in a different format. Now let's begin with Mercenary. Mercenary gives Ledakrad Nullifier Reflect and debuff immunity with damage reduction. This is overall really good as Nullifier Reflect is insanely strong. Mercenary herself is also really good if you didn't know. So yeah, Mercenary gets an A in the Ledakrad Mammo friendship by almost virtue of Nullifier counter alone. Lucius provides no copyable skills, so it's an F tier relationship. Lucius is a selfish prick that only cares about resurrecting himself. Granhilder provides debuff Reflect and healing power. Healing power is insanely good to help Ledakrad better deal with Valze. Debuff Reflect, however, allows him to hold on to any buffs he is carrying with the exception of Celia's attack, but a different defender can provide Ledakrad with actual debuff immunity to help with their stigma. Overall, S-rank synergy for Granhilder. Debuff Reflect is arguably the best skill that you could put on a unit like Ledakrad. The only downside is that it makes Ledakrad liable to be one-shot by the Deadly Gungnir spell. Orvina provides Ledakrad with Iron Wall power and stats weakening immunity. None of this is entirely useful for Ledakrad. D tier. Calarone provides Ledakrad with Distortion Damage, Regeneration Barrier, and Cleverness. The combo of Distortion Damage and Regeneration Barrier is actually really nice, and Cleverness can help for Ledakrad to hit harder. B tier synergy overall, as Distortion Damage doesn't entirely help with Ledakrad's direct damage vulnerability. Benchina provides Ledakrad with News of Victory and Grave Taunt. Grave Taunt is important because it's the only taunt ability that could be provided to Ledakrad through copying. The defense and crit boosts that come in as a result of enemy graves is also very valuable as well. Benchina allows Ledakrad to be a crazy taunt machine, so Benchina gets an A. Kaelin provides Ledakrad with Drunken Fist Guard and Combat Counter. Drunken Fist Guard is useful in that it blocks all non-direct damage, and Combat Counter is just an alright-ish counter, although the fact that it can deal 90% of damage to Ledakrad, of direct damage if a combat stigma hits him, is kinda spooky. Drunken Fist Guard synergizes very well with other potential defenders though, like Benchina for example. Kaelin overall gets a B from me. Bane provides Ledakrad with Demon Contract that comes with debuff immunity and distortion damage. Also, Masochism, which has healing and incoming damage reduction. It's not a bad set overall, solid B rank. Seer provides Ledakrad with debuff immunity and death infliction counter. Death infliction counter can be useful in some matchups such as Slain, but it's mostly a situational stigma overall. C rank for Seer. Cecilia provides Ledakrad with AoE absorption that comes with incoming damage healing, regeneration barrier, and curse counter. The regeneration barrier and curse counter are good on their own, but the true prize is the AoE absorption. This could lead to some very interesting strategies as a result. Cecilia is a solid A rank synergy for sure. Arcane provides Ledakrad with sacred armor and buff/debuff immunity. Being unable to buff your own Ledakrad is a huge detriment to many strategies, and the sacred armor slowly killing him off is also kinda counterintuitive. Arcane somehow manages to be worse than Lucius, and Lucius doesn't even provide any skills to copy. F rank synergy. Glacia provides Ledakrad with freeze counter, ice barrier, and attack interference immunity. Despite providing 3 skills, the value of each of these skills are not that much. Ice Barrier is the nicest among the 3 as it prevents Ledakrad from taking any additional damage that isn't direct damage, but direct damage is the main issue here. C tier. Last and kind of the least, Kali provides healing power to Ledakrad and is a worse version of Granhilder's one. D tier only because the 2 bozos in F tier either provide nothing or make Ledakrad worse. And there's that. So here's the final ranking. Remember that this is my opinion, and you may find some combinations that are outright busted even if the unit doesn't seem to be placed high. Experiment if you have them, and if you don't, well, theorycraft. As for non-defender synergies, Albion and Floria rise again and can lead to some pretty fun gimmicks. Albion is nice because he can provide a decent duration taunt without having to rely on Ledakrad's own 6-turn taunt or having a Banshina synergy. Galania synergizes well with Ledakrad as well, as she can mitigate his weakness to Deadly Gungnir and other things as well. The Gungnir will take down the Immortal buff and 1 stack of Chain of Emptiness if it hits Ledakrad with Granhilder's debuff Reflect, but he'll still live with his final Chain of Emptiness buff. Sola is also a really good option for Ledakrad as well, since her aura is really nice on defenders. Okay, so for my opinion, as you can probably tell by that mouthful of a synergy section, Ledakrad is a pretty complex character, or rather, he can be very complex. At the end of it all, it's really hard to say how good Ledakrad is, because he's a character that is constantly in flux. He will change in viability with every new defender that comes out or is reworked. The cool thing about Ledakrad is that he makes a lot of previously unloved defenders relevant again. Banshina until recently was often forgot about, and understandably so, but Ledakrad kinda brought her back, as a Ledakrad with Banshina's buff is really annoying to deal with, and more so is the case if he's also running Granhilder's skills. Having parts of another character's skill set can be incredibly strong. There have been many moments in Guild War where I wouldn't mind having a second Cecilia of some sort, and the Ledakrad makes that possible. I can have the cute original Cecilia and edgy emo Korean K-pop boy Cecilia, both of which absorb AoE. Nice. Ledakrad is likely to be a terror in Guild War defenses due to the amount of complexity he adds by simply just existing with his fellow defenders. Imagine dealing with 2 Granhilders in Guild War. Actually wait, you don't have to imagine that anymore. It actually exists now. Have fun and enjoy failing every Guild War attack. I know I will. Ledakrad is also very solid in Arena itself and is useful in nearly every in-game content. So the question begs, should you build and invest in Ledakrad? My answer is yes, under the condition that you already have a viable list of defenders, especially Granhilder. Granhilder is the bread that makes Ledakrad's butter. Wait, that sounds kinda weird. But I hope I got my point across. Granhilder's debuff Reflect is just so good for Ledakrad to copy. Banshina is also really important, and Mamo and Cecilia are very nice to have as well. Ledakrad is not a cheap character to build since he has reliance on existing units. If you don't have a solid roster of defenders, then Ledakrad is going to feel very underwhelming. You don't just need to have those other units, they need to be built up since he copies the skills as it is. Even if you have Granhilder or Banshina, if they're just at +1 or 2, then your Ledakrad will be very underwhelming as well. One elephant in the room is whether or not you should invest in Ledakrad over Slain. And my answer preference is towards investing in Slain by a slight amount for the reasons I've just mentioned. Slain is an independent boy who needs no man. Wait. Slain works well with far less preconditions and is very effective on his own. Even if you have a solid lineup of defenders, I still like Slain more. Ledakrad does have more potential in the future, so that's one argument to build Ledakrad over Slain if you had to pick one, but overall I still really like Slain over Ledakrad. Another question I want to touch upon is how does Ledakrad stack compared to his fellow legendary defenders of Mammonier, Granhilder, and Lucius? I think that Ledakrad has a lot more potential than Lucius at the very least, but I would still recommend building Mammonier over Ledakrad and Gran. Gran also gets priority over Ledakrad because Ledakrad depends on having a decent Gran. At the very least, when you scale up Gran, you indirectly scale up Ledakrad in some ways. Speaking of skill ups, Ledakrad's skill progression is very steady. One problem I have with Ledakrad's skills is that his tankiness corresponds to his skill rank because his first skill is where a lot of his HP comes from. Ledakrad's HP will be very underwhelming at early ranks. Ledakrad can still apply pressure with his abilities to copy skills, but your dreams of creating an ultimate super tank will be locked behind plus 10, since that's where he gets the full amount of HP from his first skill. Plus 12 is also very important as it provides him a second layer of his death-defying mechanic, which is nice to have. It also helps that plus 11 is where he gets his taunt too. With the right synergies you could probably get away with just plus 10, but plus 12 is nice to have. Anything beyond plus 12 is to increase his duration of which he stays alive after he triggers his unstable state and the duration of his death-defying buff. All of this is good to have, but not necessary to make Ledakrad function. All in all, Ledakrad is one of the game's most unique characters and has more potential and possibilities than any character thus far. He's already good as it is, and he will only get better. Thanks for watching my Ledakrad Mercenary Spotlight. If you enjoyed the video or found it helpful, please leave a like or even subscribe. Comments are nice too. I read those. Anyways, laters.